Welcome back to D&H TV. I'm Chris Phillips. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Server and how to position it versus on-prem and the cloud. To do that, we have a video presentation from Mitch Doctor, which we'll kind of get started here in a moment. Mitch is going to go through kind of all what's new with Microsoft Server. And then after that's completed, we'll kind of be back to do some Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout this presentation, you'll want to go ahead and ask them. I'm going to highlight the Q&A box for you right now. If you have any questions at all during the broadcast, go ahead, put them in the question and answer box. We will come back after the presentation is over and answer those questions. We will also be kind of pulling up poll questions during the broadcast as well. So if you take a moment to answer those poll questions, that would be fantastic to us. But without further ado, I want to kind of get started as quickly as we can. So I'm going to kind of pitch this over to Mitch to get started.
Hi, how are you? I'm Mitch Doctor, the North American Commercial Master Trainer here at Microsoft, and today we're going to jump in and talk about Windows Server 2022 and the solutions that it provides. Before we do get started, I just want to thank everybody for having me, and let's just jump right in. Why don't we? And we're going to jump in at kind of the elephant in the room and getting rid of that, and talking a little bit about Windows Server 2012 and the end of support for it. Now, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to using older server software, and that really is that the infrastructure can truly be held back. Using the older software and running an older version like Server 2012 for that matter can really hamper on modern requirements when it comes to security, performance, and overall availability of the server. Now, as a Server 2012 support does come close to its end, that is happening on October 10th of this year of 2023. And this can really leave businesses still using that old software for their server really open and vulnerable to multiple threat vectors. Now, what is end of support exactly? Well, end of support just means that Microsoft is no longer going to provide and users will no longer receive new security or non-security updates. There will be no assisted support options, no online technical content. All those things will be pulled. So what can you do? Well, the first big thing we could do is look at modernizing and innovating in new ways and making sure that businesses are prepared for the future. Essentially by upgrading to new Windows servers and Server 2022 with an Intel On platform. Now, going modern has a couple big reasons for doing so. We can see by 2022, over 50% of organizations that don't have a migration plan, even for Server 2008 or 2012 for that matter, will have to end up migrating due purely to security instances or compliance issues. So getting ahead of that and making sure that you're not kind of falling behind when it comes to security and vulnerability and stuff like that will definitely be helpful of looking at upgrading servers as soon as possible. Also, SMBs are obviously moving far more toward a hybrid capability, and we're seeing a five-fold growth in that in just 2021 to 2022 alone, and as we go beyond. And we can truly help optimize and modernize companies' footprints by looking into going to modern server solutions with Server 22 or even reaching out into Azure and the cloud. So why do customers and why do companies and organizations still even think about choosing server in the first place? And especially when we think of an on-prem server, which we'll get to in a second. Well, the big thing is file sharing and resources, right? Making sure that everybody in the business has one way or the other, and they all have a single place where they can share all their files, all their documents, and anything else for that matter. What if you want to run all of your accounting software from a single place, and you want to run QuickBooks for everyone and have an entire accounting team going after that? You can, of course, run that application on a server, and everybody on the accounting team, for instance, can access that and all of its information, and it's all stored in a single place. Also, it's a great place to make sure all of your data is protected and reduce storage costs, because all the storage is not necessarily on all the different devices that might be shared at all these different endpoints, but actually on the server where that is maintained. It also allows IT management to have a single place and single piece of security management on the server and making sure that everything on that server is secured, as well as running applications in confidence, whether that's QuickBooks, as we already kind of referred to, or email or other applications, and being able to leverage server virtualization so we can reduce upfront IT costs and making sure that all of our applications and workloads have plenty of room to both be secure and provide room for further growth. So you're going to go ahead and go, okay, but why am I going to still get a server on-prem at this point? And there are a couple big reasons. And I think I'm just going to build that out. There we go. We have regulatory compliance, and I think that's really big, in data sovereignty requirements. Depending on what verticals and where your business and organizations might exist, data must be secured on-prem. And if we think of things like medical or anything else along those lines, the type of information has to be secured on premise because it's mandated that way. Maybe there's bandwidth and restraints, or you're worried about latency on, having to go up to cloud and down, and or maybe the security or the performance bottlenecks that might be in tow with things like that. Having an on-prem server and this on-prem services that a server therefore provides allows that organization to just have a better overall infrastructure. And we can also look at the bottom line cost of it, is that the price versus performance, meaning the kind of uncertainty or inability to be able to pay for plans, monthly or quarterly or annually, and just knowing that, if I buy a server up front, I know what the cost is. There it is. And all I have to do is have IT maintain that server, rather than me having to pay, month over month or year over year in getting the services that I need. And then finally, there's just some legacy applications that still need an on-premise server to make sure that that works correctly. Now, Windows Server has been around for quite a while. If we could think back all the way to our NT4 days, server is not exactly a new thing, but is definitely a product of an evolution over the years. With over 25, almost 30 years at this point of innovation in server, we have had servers from everything from on-prem, moving into the cloud, moving into Azure, and having data centers, and expanding up into the large enterprise use, as well as just looking at, I just need it for my small office, the small office that I have 12 or 15 employees of. And we have different servers move significantly over the last years. And I think the big thing now to think about server is that it has changed again because of how the world has changed. And we look at hybrid work and the way that we do these days. On-prem solutions are wonderful, and Azure solutions or Azure Stack HCI solutions being full cloud is also really important for larger businesses. But we're finding more and more at this point, especially with Server 22 now available worldwide and generally available, that hybridization of server services and solutions is probably the way forward here into the future. Having both on-prem solutions being able to reach out into cloud solutions is truly the way we're looking at servers nowadays. And it allows us to really have a Windows server anywhere at any time. Now, let's talk about server a little bit. Server 22 editions are not very different than even Server 29 editions that came before it. There are 3 quote unquote editions, right? There's the Essentials edition. Now, I do want to bring your attention that the Essentials edition is only available through ROC solutions like HP or Lenovo ROC options. And then just a little bit more on that is that Essentials is only available to a much smaller server, if you want to picture it that way, that is a single processor with less than 10 cores available only. So it is a bit limited on what it can do, but it may fit into some user use cases in order to think of, I just need a small server, maybe just for my email services or something like that. A small server using the Essentials Edition may work. You'll notice that it also includes all of its client access licenses already, when nothing additional can be put onto those, as well as it does not support any virtualization into virtual machines whatsoever. When we think of our standard and data center editions, these are our much larger go-to editions. They can have unlimited client access licenses or remote desktop licensing that goes along with that. We'll talk a little bit more about the licensing as we go further into our discussions, as we get to talk to about our licensing specifically. But most of our servers and the server solutions you'll see and you'll work with will end up having a standard edition or data center edition as its on-prem UI solution. Now, you're going to ask, but Mitch, I have Server 2019 or I have an older version. Why do I need to start thinking about Server 2022? Where does 22 really come into play? And when we think of server, we're thinking about being able to run large business workloads in Azure or on-prem or on the edge and being able to reach absolutely anywhere. There are three large kind of verticals that we thought of when we upgraded to Server 2022 and made that generally available. One is advanced multi-layered security, the being able to kind of elevate the full-blown security posture, especially as we moved into more of this hybrid work format that we now all live in, even with the Windows 11, for instance. And we'll talk a little bit how why that matters and how that kind of transfers itself over to Windows Server 2022 here in just a moment. We also looked at how can we make server on-prem more hybrid and be able to reach out into Azure or other cloud services to allow IT to work that much more efficiently from a single place. And we'll look at that. And then lastly is how can we help empower developers and IT teams to work together to make sure that our application platforms, the way we build and deploy diverse applications, is seamless and easy. And before we get into the exact, why and hows of Server 22, I do want to bring your attention to the differences that Server 22 has that when we compare it to even just its predecessor in 2019. And the big things here you'll notice do overlap when it comes to advanced multi-layered security, that hybridization, and the flexible application platform that we talked about. And I want you to also see how close this feature set is from an on-prem, essentially perpetual licensed server operating system in Server 22 to the Azure Stack HCI cloud solution. So all those type of things that you would even get in your everyday enterprise type level subscription to Azure Stack HCI, you're now also able to get on a Windows Server 2022 license for a single use server on-prem, for instance. So let's look at needing better security solutions because we just did. We know that security is top of mind absolutely in every organization right now, especially as we've looked at hybrid work and the availability of endpoints to exist pretty much anywhere and everywhere at this point. And when we can think of the average total cost of a data breach, well over $3.5 million on average. If we think of a small business, like a small business can't afford $3.5 million to be able to mitigate a data breach at this point. And we're looking at making sure that server is not one of those vulnerable points in which a data breach may occur. And we did this by advancing our layered security and upping the security posture of the actual Windows Server 2022 operating system itself. And we did this in a couple different ways. And the first way we did it is actually partnering with our hardware partners and OEM manufacturers or silicon partners like Intel, for instance, and making sure that we have secured hardware and firmware that works in hand with the OS of Server 2022 itself. So what do I mean here? Well, using Server 2022, we can now take advantage of things like trusted platform modules. And TPM 2.0 is a much larger service when we think about it that is part of the actual silicon or hardware that Intel uses on its server processors to allow you higher levels of security. And it allows us to really modernize the CPU, boot up, and have that PC security and minimize that firmware vulnerabilities. Essentially, before a server is even ever turned on, it is that much more secure. This is where all the encryption lives, as well as all of your transfer protocols and whatnot, all live there, giving us a better root of trust and having a much firmer security foundation starting in the hardware itself. And we can do this for the very first time in Server 22, being able to take advantage of that. Using Secure Boot along with that TPM chip, we now can also load Windows securely. We have extra protection on both identity and firmware protection that has to do with that entire infrastructure of the server. And we do that using, as you see here, virtualized based security. So that VBS is able to isolate critical parts of the system, meaning your firmware, your boot sectors, and everything else that kind of makes the integrity of the server what it is. And we can put those things in this quote unquote virtualized environment. By being able to do that, we're now separating the critical parts of the services of the server itself away from, say, the file structures or even its cloud connections. So if an advanced malware did somehow get infected or take advantage of a different vulnerability within the server and say its file structures, that is still not going to be able to affect those services like firmware that might be housed within that virtualized based security quote unquote bubble, for lack of a better term. We're also able to just do a lot more when it comes to just securing the overall in and out and the communication that has to do within the server itself. And this is one more further, that all transport protocols have all been upgraded. Server 2022 by default uses TLS 1.3 enabled, meaning that is, of course, the kind of the latest version of the internet's most deployed security protocol. And by using this type of encryption on our data and the communication, we're able to eliminate obsolete cryptographic algorithms, making it just that much better and enhancing the security over all of our older versions of Server 2022's predecessors. Other big things, and another, I think, really big improvement is that when we think of how servers and how clusters used to communicate, there was no encryption done within a single server cluster, meaning clusters communicated unencrypted. All that data is now also encrypted by default in Server 2022. So we're moving away from that vulnerability and that exploit and just being able to have all communication, whether it's even in the same server, out to the cloud, or anything else for that matter, that much more secure. So let's switch gears and talk a little bit about that hybridization and looking at how we can better use hybridization and cloud solutions together, even though we're using an on-prem solution like Windows Server 2022. And I think we can see here that IT is just like, hey, I have this cloud service, or I have this, and I have on-prem. How can I make this easier to manage all of this from one place? So we did just that. We want to be able to take a single data center or a single set of servers and be able to reach out into the cloud. And we've been able to do that using Azure Arc. Now, Azure Arc has been around for a little while with Azure Stack HCI users, and this allows users to essentially manage all of their cloud solutions, whether it's in Azure or AWS or any other service for that matter, and virtualize all those extensions and applications and manage all that from a single pane of glass, whether we're governing the security or how things update, or we're looking at role-based access and control. All those things can be done from a single pane of glass, like Windows Admin Center, which we'll take a look at here in a second. But for the very first time, Windows Server 2022 allows on-prem servers to also be managed in that same way and also take advantage of what is in the cloud using this Azure Arc enablement. So now we have the full-blown management and enablement from a single pane of glass, like Windows Admin Center, which has its latest version out relatively recently, all the way from on-prem all the way out into essentially any cloud solution that an organization might be using. We can see here that Windows Server and Admin Center is locally deployed, and it is all browser-based, meaning that it is a single pane of glass to be able to access absolutely anything and any workloads, whether it's being able to set up new virtualized workloads or new VMs itself, the virtual machines, or controlling what happens on-prem or on the cloud, or even being able to set up things like storage migration services. Maybe you have a much older server and you have a newer server and you're not sure how all of that's going to talk. So now you're able to take advantage of storage migration services as part of Azure cloud services when you have Windows Server 2022. With a Server 22 and in that kind of new cluster, it can reach out into Azure and out into the cloud and reach other branched versions of server and file sync all of those together. So if you want quick and easy migration, you can do all that without ever taking a server offline and allowing for quick, whether it's backup or restoration, no matter where those files might be. And then this goes one further here, and being able to use something like auto manage. Now, auto manage again has been able to be used around Azure Stack HCI, as well as Azure and other cloud-based virtual machine workloads. But now we can also manage on-prem workloads from this same place. So whether IT wants to look at monitoring or how they do full-blown update management, or they want to make sure that all the security protocols or their backups and everything is done as in a proactive way, all of this can be done through auto manage. And I think one of the huge things through auto manage is, for me, this has been a game changer, is things as simple as a security update to Windows itself. So we can apply security updates automatically through Auto Manager, even to an on-prem or cloud solution, wherever the workloads and VMs might live. And we don't have to take down any of those servers or services or VMs for something as simple as a security update. And all that while using Azure Auto Manage can help companies keep all of their uptime up, right? And not having to close down or close up shop early or something like that, for instance, to just be able to apply security updates. And Auto Manage can also run fully in an exception-only management mode. So when it comes to those virtual machines, it will essentially do all the monitoring for you. And if something comes back as an exception, like, oh, this security update did not run right on this group of virtual machines, you, IT, should probably go take a look at this, and then can manage that manually rather than having to go in and manually push those updates every single time. So the auto managed services that live in Azure can do that, even to an on-prem solution like Server 2022 now. All right, so let's talk a little bit about dev and ITs, and obviously their work together, and how Server 22 is making that flexible application platform truly come to life. And I think we'll just talk about for half a second. Yes, the new SQL Server 2022 is available today, and you can, of course, talk to your representatives for more information on that. But SQL is just running better on Server 22. And you got to ask why? Well, there's a lot more usability when it comes to it, especially when we look at using the new Intel SGX server processors. This allows users not only to take advantage of more sockets and more logical processors, but it also allows them to isolate their applications and their virtual workloads while physically computing, so nothing malicious or outside factors can actually access that data or application that is physically being worked on at that time. So it is a big step forward when it comes to both security and computing power when using SQL. But it's not just that, but we also want to make sure developers and IT alike get more out of what they need. And I think the big thing here is with the much larger use of containerization and using containerization as a better platform, Server 2022 is now able to do just that. We can have scalability and performance improvements when it comes to using containers. And not just that, but for the first time as an on-prem solution, Server 22 also allows for full-blown support of Kubernetes integration. So being able to align with all the industry standards of containers and bring the latest and greatest of Windows containers to an on-prem server like Server 22. Now, I think the other big step forward here is that this huge improvement around containerization actually is even easier than it looks. Using Windows Admin Center and that single pane of glass for management we talked about earlier, you can now manage and create Windows containers through the actual admin portal. So instead of worrying about writing Docker files or being able to worry about how you get different applications in different ways and having to physically write those things, all of it is now completely able to be done by drop-down menu. As you can see here, we can create different images and you can create your entire container the way you'd want, or the way that the the application or developers are needing to work for that, whether it's for testing or ready for deployment, and keeping all those containers safe and secure. So there's no more worrying about writing the files and able to make the container. Someone can simply use a drop-down menu and select which protocols and what they need for that container to be able to do, select that, and hit create and have that container built as a full-blown Windows container on server through Windows Admin Center. All right, so that's a lot. Server 22 has a lot of great things, and now you're ready and you're going, yeah, I'm ready to do an upgrade to Server 22 or really start having those conversations. How do I do it? What does that look like for me? What does bottom dollar look like? So let's talk a little bit about licensing. Here are the additions again that we already talked about. And we'll get to additions again here in a second, but there are a couple ways that licensing works. One, there's always going to be client access licenses, and client access licenses are important to remember because these are how each individual user or each individual device is able to access the server. CALs are necessary and available for both user or devices, depending on what that use case might be. And of course, you can talk to your representatives about that as necessary, depending on what your use cases might be, to be able to know, hey, how large of a pack? Do I need 1? Do I need 5? Do I need 10? Do I need 50? Do I need a customization version of how many different client access licenses I need to be able to use the services on the server that I am now using? So let's talk about the server itself. Every server license has a base license. For simplification, the base license is good for 16 cores. So you're going to buy a brand new server and you're going to license server 22 for it. You're going to get a base license of 16 cores. Awesome. Great. Now, what happens if you're buying a system with maybe 20 cores, for example? Well, you're going to buy that base license plus one of our additional core packs. In this case, an additional 4-core pack. Now, when we do look at OEM and being available through OEM, if you have a specific 24-core server, there is a 24-core option through OEM as well, and you can talk to your representatives about that license in that specific case. So let's dig a little bit deeper here, because now you understand, okay, I understand how many processors and how many licenses. Now, do I need to go standard or I need to go data center? And we'll look at why and how in just a second, but there's really only one big difference here between the standard edition and the data center edition of server. I'm gonna make myself invisible here for a second so we can see, but the big difference here is the use case of virtual machines. Now, standard edition of Server 22 allows for only 2 virtual machines within a single license. The big difference here is data center allows for an unlimited amount. And we'll look at what this looks like here in a second, is if, well, what if I only want to run 4 virtual machines? Do I need to go to data center and spend probably a much larger amount of money? And the quick answer is no. But let's look at what that explanation looks like here in the next couple slides. So in this slide, we're going to look at kind of the server licensing and the overview here for physical processors and physical licensing. In this example above, we can look at the minimum 8-core processor or even a minimum 16-core processor, and all these need are a base license, or that 16 core license we talked about earlier. The good best practice here, and there's really only 3 licensing rules when you can think about this when you talk to your sales rep, is all your physical cores on the server need to be licensed. Just ensure that every processor is licensed to cover that 8 minimum core, or that every server is licensed to cover a minimum of 16 cores. Once you have that, you're pretty much set up for success as you look at licensing overall. Now, that's all you really need to be compliant. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of these other scenarios. Now, we're just going to build this out and talk about this for a second, but when we look at physical servers, or you're looking at core servers or a server with multiple cores, just know, as we already said, as long as every core and every processor is covered, you'll be compliant when we're looking at licensing. Now, this goes back to our conversation where we were just having about virtual machines. With standard, you can have a single license, and that single license is going to afford you 2 virtual machines. And you're going to go, but Mitch, I need to go up to 5 virtual machines to run multiple workloads on-prem on my Server 2022 solution. Great. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to relicense all of your cores in an additional pack, for instance, which these additional packs for relicensing are their own license, meaning that they'll stack on your base license, meaning that your permission, your license keys and whatnot won't change. All you're using is a relicense, and it's a slightly different SKU when you do talk to your sellers about this. That it's just going to relicense and add 2 more virtual machines to your license. And you can do that again for a second time. And you can keep doing this over and over and over again. Meaning, so if you wanted 10, you can, purchase 5 standard editions if you wanted to. But eventually, there is a break-even point where it doesn't make sense anymore. And you want to be able to go from stacking standard licenses. And instead of stacking standard licenses, you'll want to go to the data center edition. You're going to go, Mitch, when does that make sense? Well, if we're talking about the 16 core base license pack for server, that kind of break-even point when it comes to virtualization and your higher need for virtualization usually comes somewhere between 10 to 12 virtual machines. Now, if you're buying a new server and you're only going to be using maybe 4 to 6 virtual machines up front, but you might see your growth happening quite readily or quite quickly over, say, the next year or 2, you might want to consider using a data center edition so that you don't have to worry about extra cost in the long run, and you're going to pay that flat fee of the data center edition, and you'll have virtualization that you could use pretty much forever on that server. Or if you, for instance, are using one of those multi-license packs that we talked about earlier with the additional cores, meaning you could have the 16 core plus the 4 to reach a 20 core processor, for instance. This number may shift more to the left, right? And it's going to shift a little bit more left here, specifically because that upfront cost is going to be a little bit more. So data center for your high virtualization needs or higher core and higher core processor server solutions, data center is probably going to be the better solution overall. And finally, we'll talk a little bit more about these client access licenses. Remember, CALs are either user or device-based. So if you know that you're going to have users using multiple devices to access the server, you're going to consider using user CALs. But if you know that you're going to have multiple users using, 5 or 10 given devices, and those are going to be the only devices accessing the server and the server information, then you would use a device CALs for that. Those are, of course, kind of on paper and licensed that way. Now, if you are using any remote desktop services to be able to access the server and what is available on the server, these additive CALs or these RDS CALs are required individually for every single user or device that will be able to be used. So an RDS CAL would go along with either your user or device CAL. So for instance, if we know that a user works from home and they need remote desktop services into that server, they'll have to have both a user CAL and an RDS CAL attach that to be able to take advantage of RDS services on the server. Of course, for more of this and finding out how many CALs you need, you can, of course, talk to your representative who will be able to give you more and more information and the available that you will need to fulfill your solution. If you want to get started and you have more questions on that, there is a lot out there. You can download a preview of Server 2022 right now. You can go ahead and look at the newest Windows Admin Center, which is completely free to download as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And I think we're going to lead over into the Q&A. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Yep. Thank you, Mitch, for that presentation, and welcome back, everyone. Also want to welcome in Steve Bernard. He's our the D&H Microsoft Server OEM specialist. Steve, how's it going today?
It's going good, Chris.
So I actually want to kind of follow up with you on something that Mitch was talking about right at the end, which was licensing. He kind of talked about the different forms that Microsoft Server 2022 comes in, but he didn't talk about the different ways it's licensed. Can you expand a little bit about how our customers can purchase Microsoft Server 2022?
Sure, thank you, Chris. You did a great job of talking about, the different editions of Windows Server: Windows Standard, Windows Data Center, and Windows Server Essentials. But there are different methods of fulfillment. My particular niche is Microsoft OEM Windows Server, new which is for new systems only, not upgrades. A lot of what he discussed and referring to base licenses and additional license packs, which he didn't describe as such, really refer to my particular niche. But especially when you're doing an upgrade, there's other ways to fulfill Windows Server. There's CSP for cloud service providers, and you can also obtain Windows Server through open license, which is now consists of open value only, subscription based, with software assurance. My particular niche is Microsoft OEM, and we have different teams that can help answer your licensing questions depending upon how you want to fulfill that. My particular niche is Microsoft OEM, and the alias for us is Microsoft OEM at dnh.com. We have the CSP, or the Cloud Solutions team, which is modern applications at dnh.com. And for open value with software assurance, we have the license desk at dnh.com. When he mentioned to speak to your rep about your licensing questions, I certainly welcome him to reach out to me at Microsoft OEM at DNH. I'll definitely help answer any questions you have regarding the licensing. Key points to remember is that for Windows Server Standard and Data Center, there is a minimum of 16 processor cores. With Windows Server Standard, you get 2 VMs every time all the processor cores are licensed. To add 2 more virtual machines, you license all the processor cores again. When it comes to the SKUs, you talked about things being, you called the additional license packs slightly different SKUs. Again, I talk to partners all the time. When it comes to OEM and even cloud solution provider or open value, there's so many different options. We're here to help you make, the best choice. So please, don't guess, reach out to one of our teams and we'll gladly step you through the licensing process. Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. Rodney asked a question specifically around how to do CALs work when you're using Exchange license or Exchange server.
That would be a question for the license desk or CSP,
Okay.
but I believe that is user based,
Right.
just like Windows Server is.
So people know the Exchange server is not available through OEM, correct?
No, Microsoft OEM is system builder software. It's base OS licensing only. Windows Server or Windows if you're building desktops or laptops. When it comes to applications like SQL, Exchange, no, those are not OEM solutions. Office is not an OEM solution.
Excellent. Rodney had one other question. I think I'll take a stab at fielding this one. He wanted to know if we saw that small businesses were using more on-prem server versus Azure. I would say right now, based on my experience talking with resellers, we're still seeing a lot of on-prem, and I would continue to believe that we'd see a lot more of on-prem as we go. I don't think you're ever going to see an instance where on-prem completely leaves your IT solution for server and data center. I will say that you'll start to see a lot more of hybrid solutions where you can access all of your data, whether you're doing it on-prem or through an Exchange server. So for right now, I don't see server hardware going away locally. It's just so cost effective for most or for some customers that it's just not something I see going away.
His question is a good one, Chris.
Yeah.
His question is a good one, and I'll mention that because we talked about the fact that Windows Server Essentials has, for all intents and purposes, gone away except through manufacturer branded
Correct.
reseller option kit software like HPE or Lenovo. When Windows Server 2019 came out, years ago, Windows Server Essentials wasn't available for a good 4 to 6 months after Standard and Data Center was released. And the thought was at the time that Microsoft was suggesting that instead of a small business using its own server, they really thought that everybody was going to move, or they really would like more and more customers to move to Azure, which is probably why there is no true Server Essentials available today.
There is one poll result I wanted to kind of share with you, Steve, because I think it's interesting. It talks specifically about the end of support for Server 2012 and whether our viewers still have customers that are on Server 2012. When we asked the question, 64% said yes, and they've approached those customers about the Server 2012 end of support. Another additional 20% said yes, but they haven't had that discussion yet about end of support. And another 16% have just said no, that they don't have any customers that are on Server 2012. The interesting thing about that is that's still 84% of customers, of the people that are watching, that have customers that have some device that's on Server 2012. There was a question there, was whether there's going to be extended support options for 2012, and if we have prices. Based on Microsoft's past experience, I would say that the answer is yes, but the pricing I have no clue on, and it's probably not going to make sense for you unless you're a massive organization to pay for extended support rather than just doing the upgrade. So something to keep in mind there, Steve.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about extended support options for Server 2012. I do recall that, recall hearing about the extended support options that are available for the cloud service provider platform, and they are on a multi-year cycle.
Right.
Where the price increases as it gets farther and farther out. And I know that if you want to, if you skip a year or you skip several months, you have to essentially backfill or pay for what you miss. But our modern applications at dnh.com would have the information on that.
Yeah, I would say, just from past experiences, I have not found very small to medium businesses going the extended support route, even if they found it was available to them. It's just more cost effective to go ahead and either invest in new hardware and do the upgrade, or if you can upgrade that hardware that is running 2012, go ahead and do that. But like this point, chances are that server's at least 10 years old, maybe 7. It's probably time to start thinking about upgrade anyway.
I just want to point out your statistics here for those people listening that aren't talking to people about Server 2012 and to support. You're missing the opportunity because there's all kinds of revenue in selling new servers and software that you're missing by not talking to your customers about the Server 2012 and to support. And you certainly don't want them to receive malware, or a virus because they're not receiving the security updates. They're going to point their finger at you, unfortunately.
Yeah, it always happens. Well, Steve, thank you so much for your input on this. It was greatly appreciated. If you guys have any questions regarding Microsoft OEM licensing, I highly recommend reaching out to Steve. I've been working with him for 7 years on this stuff. It feels like, is it about 7 years you've been doing this?
9.
Oh my gosh, now I'm feeling way old. He's been doing this for a while. He's my guru. He's my sensei. Anytime I have questions about OEM, I go to him directly. So I would encourage you to utilize him as a resource as well. But with that, we're going to call this a day. I would like to note that we do have an upcoming broadcast on Thursday. We're going to be talking about captive audience and selling esports and content creation solutions. I will be doing that broadcast with Chad Bowser. I got a lot of great things to talk about on that broadcast. So if you're free on Thursday, same time, I highly encourage you guys to attend. If you have any questions after this broadcast, feel free to reach out to us, techsolutions@dnh.com. We'll be more than happy to answer them. you have any questions for Steve, we can go ahead and forward those on to him, or we can reach out to Steve directly. But with that, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Mitch, for all your hard work and putting that presentation together. And we look forward to hearing from you guys later. Thanks.